Welcome. You're listening to The Aligned Self, Conversations in Creating a Conscious and Abundant Life. This is Daniel Denovi. I'll be your guide and host. Let's see just where we can take this. Hello, friend, and welcome back to the conversation. Now, if you've listened to the last 2 or 3 episodes, you might have experienced a couple glitches in the audio, where some of the statements, some of the words that I was using, there was a little dropout. Well, I had done what most people recommend, is upgrade to the latest version of the software. And in doing that, I was experiencing crashes over and over again. The program would just simply close, much to my chagrin. Well, for the most part, these upgrades weren't really constituting any advantage to me. I wasn't using any of the new features. And so I have reverted back to an earlier version of the audio software that I use in order to head off any of these crashes, these glitches. So my goals, cross my fingers, is that I'm going to have a cleaner sound audio from this point forward until I find some better solution. Many of you may not have noticed, and that's okay. But if you're a particular auditory person, you may have noticed and wondered what was going on. Well, you now have the answer. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about how to deal with a negative person. Now, some of you have indicated that you have a negative spouse or a negative partner, somebody in your life that is predominantly negative. If you say yes, they say no. If you say black, they say white. They are what is typically considered a polarity responder, meaning that whatever you say, they typically take a polar response. They say the opposite, just to be, in a word, adversarial. But it goes deeper than that. They are actually responding from a defense mechanism. They have an essential fear or an insecurity of being swept in. When I say swept in, captured by an ideology, an idea that is not best for them. So they're naturally skeptical of whatever is out there. There's a fear in some way that they're going to be controlled, trapped, and held hostage. That might be a little extreme, but consider that it is coming from a place of fear. When we say something or have an approach and they come back at us with an adversarial position or a defensive position, we tend to get defensive right back in their face. And it's a no-win scenario, really. Each of you are trying to prove who is right. So as you may know, I've been studying the phenomena of hypnosis for decades, and I'm a certified trainer of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. What I'm going to talk about today was modeled after Milton Erickson, a phenomenal hypnotherapist. And from him, many of the techniques and strategies of NLP have been modeled. And so what I'm going to discuss today comes from conversational hypnosis, or in other terms, Ericksonian hypnosis. And so, my friend, as you listen to this episode and you obtain value from the offering, consider going deeper and joining me in the Nexus to learn even more about becoming a more effective human and communicator, developing a better relationship with other people, but also yourself. As I stated, what we're going to discuss today is derived from Ericksonian hypnosis. But, if you really think about it, you already know this stuff. It's been taught in sales schools for many years. And these are considered tie-downs, negative statements. When you think of it from the perspective of law of attraction, one cannot not think of something. Meaning that when you say you don't want something, what you're actually doing is suggesting that you do want it. In 1946, Disney released a movie called Song of the South with a character named Uncle Remus. Now, it comes from the books Uncle Remus, and in that, which was written in order to convey the African folktales of the enslaved Africans. Now, in those books, there's a character called Brer Rabbit, or Briar Rabbit. In one scene, Briar Rabbit is caught by a wolf, and the wolf symbolizes the white man. Briar Rabbit symbolizes the enslaved African, and it's clear that the wolf wants to do harm to Briar Rabbit. So Briar Rabbit, knowing that the wolf wants to do him harm, says, "Don't throw me in that briar patch. Don't throw me in that briar patch." Like, that is the worst thing. But that's exactly where the rabbit wants to go, because in the briar patch, he's protected. The wolf cannot go in the briar patch. But don't throw me in that briar patch. He ends up throwing him in the briar patch. So how we handle a potentially negative person, a polarity responder in your life, is by giving them the opportunity to disagree with something that you want them to believe. But in conveying what you want them to believe, you're setting it up like, don't think about it. And the only alternative is for them to actually think about it or take that position. Because if they disagree, then they actually accept it. And we expect them to disagree. For instance, I know you believe that you don't think I can do this. It seems to me like you believe that this is not the right approach. The way you're talking to me, I get the impression that you don't believe that I have your best interests at heart. And that's okay. I accept your right to disagree with me. I'm not disagreeing with you. No, I want you to disagree with me. I want you to express your opinion, even though sometimes it comes across like you don't support me. Well, that's not true. I support you. I just don't always think the way you're going about it is the right way to do it. I respond, that's okay. You see, what do we typically do when they've expressed a negative opinion? We'll say something like, don't be so negative. Or you always talk about what could go wrong. You see, with that statement, they have no recourse but to disagree with anything that you say or see what is wrong with your approach. Because that's the expectation. That's essentially the hypnotic command that you're giving. Continue to be negative. If you're a child and you have a parent that's constantly critical or controlling, you can say, I know that you don't believe I can do this and that you're afraid I'm going to make the wrong choice, aren't you? It feels like a part of you doesn't believe I can think for myself. Isn't there a point in time when you realize that you're not going to be able to control everything that I do? And if you think back, some of your greatest life lessons were from mistakes you made in the process of growing up, weren't they? Wouldn't you think that if you can't control what's going on, the only thing that you could control is to allow me to make my own mistakes? And if I fall down, be there to pick me up. You will be there to pick me up if I fall down, won't you? And I have to admit, sometimes it feels like you don't want me to have fun or experience any joy in my own path. No, that's not true at all. And you can even say, it's true, I might make the wrong choice. And I know a part of you does not believe in me or feel that you can even trust me. Isn't that what you think? I mean, what if I proceed and everything goes right? Everything happens amazingly. I have a lot of fun. There's no worries. Would that be so terrible? You see, you're giving them an opportunity to disagree. No, that wouldn't be terrible. That would be ideal. Sometimes you have a teenager that is set in their ways. They want to do it their way, and they're upset because you're not letting them or allowing them to do it how they want to. And they're being rather ornery. Ornery is a good word. You can acknowledge it seems like you're really upset. Why don't you take this opportunity to tell me all the ways I'm not showing up for you? Tell me all the ways that I don't love you. Tell me, if you were the parent, what different choices would you make? And remember, you not only have to consider what your child wants, but also what is their long-term safety? How is this developing them in becoming a man or a woman? I would really like to hear your point of view on how you would do it. What kind of parent would you be? Now, let me break that down a little bit because I said a lot. Tell me how I'm not showing up for you, Tell me how I don't love you. Now, it's very possible they're going to tell you all the ways that you're not showing up for them, but in order for them to consider it, the subconscious suggestion is that you are showing up for them, but not necessarily in all the ways they want. So the suggestion is still planted in their mind. You are showing up for them. You do love them. There's just some details that you might disagree on. Remember, you're in it for the long term. You're playing the long game. And you also want to hear their opinion. You want to get their point of view. And when they feel heard and you're actually asking for their opinion, it is respectable to them. You're respecting them. And when you give them the charge to give you suggestions on how to be a better parent, how would they be a parent, you're actually giving them a set of criteria that they're probably not thinking of. My dad used to do this with me, and it basically, if I broke a rule, if I did something wrong, he would say, given the decision that you made, if you were the parent, what is, I guess, an equitable punishment? What should be the consequence? And very often, the consequence I came up with was going to be a lot worse than what he was going to come up with. Let's say that your son or daughter is talking back to you and being rather defiant. And you can ask them, if you were a parent and your child spoke to you the way you just did to me, what would be your response? Would you slap them? Would you ground them? If your child was talking back to you and being disrespectful, would you allow it? Another approach might be, I know you think that I'm limiting your life, and you have trouble giving me the benefit of the doubt, don't you? The idea that I might actually know what I'm talking about, or I might have had a similar experience and it didn't go well. I know it's hard for you to understand that I have your best interest at heart. Or maybe you don't want to understand it. You don't want to think that I love you and I have your best interest in mind. I know there's a part of you that doesn't want to trust me, and that's okay. Now, I can understand on first listening that this idea may not resonate with you, may not land, and sometimes people have to listen to it for, 2 or 3 times on repeat. Now, don't listen to it any more than you have to really get the idea grounded in your psyche. Now, to give you a little summation, some of the terms that you can use is wouldn't you, couldn't you, don't you? Or you can reverse it and say you don't, you wouldn't, you couldn't. Other terms are, I understand you can't. I mean, I understand you have so much anger in you, you can't agree with me. It just wouldn't make sense, would it? Because then you wouldn't be angry anymore. Because then you'd have to accept that being angry is pointless, isn't it? See, you can put it on the front end, wouldn't you agree? Or a part of you can see how agreeing with me would make sense, wouldn't it? Put it on the end. Don't you see that this could cause some potential problems for you? Or this could cause some potential problems for you, couldn't it? Or if you proceed, couldn't it create some potential problems for you? So you can put it on the beginning, you can put it on the end, or put it in the middle. But the idea is to say the statement that you want to get across and put that little contraction on there that gives them the opportunity to polarize against you. So on some level, they're disagreeing. They have that satisfaction of disagreeing with you, but they're actually agreeing with you in their disagreement. The other part of that is that the mind cannot not think of something. So by giving them the opportunity to not think about something, it satisfies that polarity response, and they cannot think about anything else than the thing that you want them to think about. Isn't that interesting? You know how some people say to you when you're leaving, have a safe trip, drive safe? I've often had fun by saying, drive like a maniac. And their immediate response, what? What? And I said, well, don't drive any safer than you have to. Now, this also works when you're telling people to not forget something. Like, don't forget, don't forget. That's actually a command to forget, even when you talk to yourself, like, don't forget. Now, another term that implies failure is try. And I'll say, don't remember. And they say, what? Don't remember. Just try and forget. And what's interesting is that the more you try and forget, the more that you remember. They'll say, what? And I'll say, it's okay. You can remember if you want. This also works when you're talking to yourself, and part of you thinks you might fail. Part of you thinks it's not going to work out. You can say, I know part of me feels like it's not going to work out. You're actually addressing that subpersonality, that aspect of you that has a different point of view than your dominant subpersonality or this dominant intention. I know a part of me doesn't feel like I can do this, but wouldn't it be fun if I could? Wouldn't it be interesting if we exceeded our expectation? I know on this surface it doesn't feel like I'm going to have fun doing this, but what if we do? What if we have just a little bit more fun than's possible? Wouldn't that be interesting? Now, if you've listened this far, I'm wondering if you have the impression that language can be a lot more interesting than you've given yourself the permission to consider. I've always loved this quote from martial artist Bruce Lee. Before I studied the art, a kick was just a kick, and a punch was just a punch. But once I began studying the art, a punch was more than a punch, and a kick was more than a kick. But since I've extensively studied the art, now a kick is just a kick and a punch is just a punch. Now, this approach requires a very curious mind, which you may not have, to really dive deep in the intricacies of what a lot of people consider just a normal part of life. So for myself, I've actually practiced saying things a lot of different ways to get the feeling of what resonates the most, what seems to make the most impact. And in the past, I've practiced with, call centers. We're calling into call centers. And I'll say to them, I understand you're probably limited in your capacity to help me make decisions on my behalf, that you're limited by policy. Isn't that true? Sometimes they'll give me an answer that I don't like. I understand that you don't have the power to make a decision on my behalf on this. Would you be willing to get me a superior or a manager? And if they truly can't give me the result that I want, they pass me off to a manager. But if they can make a decision for me, they usually do at that point in time. You can even do this by getting a cup of coffee at a local coffee shop, Starbucks, or I understand you can't give this to me for free, but is there any kind of discount you could extend me? You do have that kind of power, don't you? Sometimes they can automatically give you a 10% discount or a 15% senior discount. Now, this is something I'm just encountering by asking, do you give a senior discount? And then what I always like is they don't believe I'm a senior citizen, which is a term that I usually avoid unless I'm seeking a discount. And then I'll gladly take it. So as I bring this conversation to a close, don't put this into practice in your life right away. Play with it, work with it. But then again, one can't become proficient in such a thing until they practice. Isn't that true? And by all means, don't practice this any more than is necessary, but just enough to actually get the skill, actually get the feeling of it. Maybe it's been a while since your spouse kissed you. Avoid saying, "Why don't you kiss me anymore?" All that's going to do is elicit a bunch of reasons on why maybe they haven't kissed you. You might ask, "Do you love me?" Of course. Don't you want to seal that with a kiss? Wouldn't that begin to show how much you love me? If you've enjoyed this episode, don't let me know any faster than you can type out the message by going to yesdaniel.com. And if you haven't yet listened to every one of the episodes that I've released, it's okay. Just don't consider all the information that you don't yet know that you could know. And also, if you have found value in this, don't tell anybody else about this. Keep it all for yourself. Keep all the secrets for yourself. Well, until next time, this is your friend and host, Daniel Dano V, urging you to follow your bliss. Live your life from inner signals. Be inner directed as you engage in the epic adventure.